We've been talking project management. Now, let's shift to certification because life is much better with certifications. So, which is better, the RTPM or the PMP? Stay tuned.
Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling Podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. Well, seeing how we're pulling Category 6A, the most powerful twisted pier in the world, you gotta ask yourself this one question. Did I pull 295 or 300 feet? Well, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? In this podcast, you'll learn the differences between a 66 and 110 punch tool, the proper way to install a support cable, along with testing and certifying the cable. What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. The elite professional, knowledgeable, and experienced in leading-edge ICT design principles. So join us as we talk about the ever-changing world of telecommunications. From ISP to OSP, from copper to fiber, design to installation. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Welcome to the show where we tackle tough questions that are submitted by installers, project managers, estimators, IT customers, anybody who has a cabling question. Feel free to send it to us and we'll answer it. On this show, we connect at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and hitting the bell button to be notified when new shows are being published? If you're listening to this on podcast, iTunes or Google Play or one of the others, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? If it's anything less than a 5-star, reach out to me. Let's talk about it and let's make the show even better. You see, both of those steps help us take on the algorithm so more people can hear this message. More people can have their lives improved. Also, make sure that you join our live after hours sessions. We multi-stream it on both LinkedIn Live and YouTube. And again, we're going to be another one on Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we're going to do a live Q&A session. You can always submit your questions early. You can either submit them via direct message on LinkedIn. You can send us to us at questions@letstalkcabling.com, or you can actually send any other kind of communication method. There's actually a speak pipe thing on the website as well. Questions that are submitted before get precedence to the ones on the live session, and that's just because I got to get through them first. The last session that we actually had time for some live ones as well. And finally, while I do provide this content free of charge, and it will always be free of charge, and you would like to support this channel, we have set up a Patreon page. The Patreon page has 4 different tiers. Each of those tiers gives you additional benefits for being to help support this page because it costs money for service for the web page and the Buzzsprout and everything else. It all costs money. When you join one of those 4 levels, there's special content that you'll be able to get hold of, special documents, special groups, and access to other things that, like for example, another live Q&A. We have our first Patreon subscriber. Thank you, Shotzi Lee. So over the last 5 episodes, we've been discussing project management. First, we started off with definitions. Then we followed that up with stakeholders. And finally, we went through the phases of the project management lifecycle. We are closing the series now with certifications, like you heard in the intro. We're going to talk about 2 of them, the RTPM and the PMP. And our industry recognizes both of them. Now, I'm neither an RTPM or a PMP, so I had to bring in some subject matter experts. So we did 2 interviews. Now, this was actually originally supposed to be the last episode of the project management series, but those interviews, they are not super lengthy, but they're long enough that I need to break them up into 2 different episodes. So tonight's episode, we're going to be talking to an RTPM. So I want to welcome today Drew Arras. He is an RCDD, a DCDC, and an RTPM. He has more certifications than me. I'm kind of jealous, gotta admit. So his background is he has been a technician, a project foreman, a project manager, and now a national project manager. Welcome
Yeah.
to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. Our pleasure. I think this is going to give the audience a good rounded out view on the differences between an RTPM and a PMP. So, got about 10 questions just so I want to ask you, and then I may ask you some additional ones based just on the conversation. Just kind of really depends on the flow. So the first one is we got to get a little bit to know about you. So tell us a little bit about your career path and how you ended up here. And I don't mean here's on the show. I mean where you are in your current career.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. My parents and my uncle ran a structured cabling company and electrical contractor. So got into the business, honestly. I mean, 16, summertime, I was out digging ditches on the electrical side for my dad. Quickly realized that structured cabling is a lot less physically demanding than electrical work. So I was like, let's go to telecom. So started pulling cable. So got out of school and started working for him. He sold his company like 2001 to Black Box when they were buying up all these national contractors. Yep. So then he retired and I joined the union there in Indianapolis, and they sent me and got my technician through the apprenticeship. Quickly became a foreman there. 2008 happened and the economy crashed, especially in the Midwest. Indianapolis was hit really hard. Mm-hmm. So I had just gotten married. My wife is from North Carolina, where we live now. So we moved down to Raleigh and got a job and quickly became project foreman down there. And I think I hit 30 years old and I realized, man, I don't want to be pulling cable at 40. Like I got to get in the office because it was starting to take a toll, carrying 12-foot ladders, working 12 hours a day at Fort Bragg. And so got into the office, started a hybrid position of project manager and project foreman still. And that's when Bixby came out with the RTPM. So it was still like that interim trial period. So I was one of the first ones in the country to get it. So I had an eye for the longest time until they officially made it a certification. So I really enjoyed the class. I mean, it really helped my career. I wasn't ready yet to take the RCDD. So the project management was a good piece to get some certifications and get, people to look at you, take you more seriously in the industry now. And quickly from there, a couple years later, I got my RCDD. I just got my DCDC. And that's a challenging one. I mean, it's that one was hard, and I feel very accomplished for getting that.
Yeah, I took a DCDC, a days in a class with Big C last year, and holy cow, it just boggled my mind. I just thought I thought I knew a lot about our industry until I went through that class, and I was like, there's like 5 levels of redundancy. I'm like,
yeah, and that one I like is because it brings in the mechanical, the HVAC, and the electrical, all the components of a data center. You're not just focusing on the level 1, the structured cabling portion of it. I mean, you're really designing the data center. So
now, before I ask you the next question, I got to ask you, how was that transition for you coming from the field to being a project manager?
It wasn't as difficult. And I'll tell you why. When I took the class down in Bixby, the teacher basically was like, you have to act the part of the job you want. So if you want to be project manager, even if your official title is not project manager, just start telling people you're the project manager, because that's what a foreman does. I mean, you're doing the documentation and you're turning it into the project manager, who might put it in CAD or, put it into the computer. But I mean, you're doing the documentation, you're managing it, you're talking to the customer or the GC every day. It's just a different role. You put on a collared shirt now, or you dress up a little bit more. But I didn't have any real problem switching from foreman to project manager.
See, that's one of the things I've noticed in my career is that we are really good at promoting our foremen, who are really good, like you said, documentation and meeting with the customer, into being project managers. But even though some of those things overlay with each other, there's things project managers do that project foremen don't. they track budgets and
Yeah.
all that other fun stuff. And that's where a lot of people run into the problems. What made you decide to pursue your the RTPM certification?
I knew I eventually want to get my RCDD. My dad and my uncle both had that, but at the time I was just intimidated from it. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, you really do have to buckle down and study. Whereas just to get into the project management role that I wanted to, my company agreed. Let's go for that first. Get you to understand the basics of project management, and then we'll start pursuing the RCD down the road a little bit.
Gotcha. Now, when you're doing your evaluation and trying to make that decision, did you compare the RTPM versus the PMP?
I did, and the PMP is probably the gold standard for project management, but I don't feel like a lot of the PMBOK applies to our industry just because we're so niche and we're like the last part of the project. So, I mean, our critical path really is our lead times for materials, and then are the pathways installed.
Right.
I mean, other than that, there's not that much to it. So they take a lot of the PMBOK principles, they teach you that, but they teach you how to apply it to structure cabling.
Right.
So if you're in the industry, I would recommend the RTPM. Now, if you're going to get into general contracting or running really, really big jobs, I would say PMP is probably better. But
And
for
that's
our
kind of near
industry,
what I tell people too when they ask me. I always ask them when they ask me, should I pursue the PMP or the RTPM? My very first question back to them is, do you plan on staying in telecommunications?
Yeah.
And if their answer is I don't know, then I say then you need to do some homework. You need to do some soul searching, because you're right. The PMP is, the project manager is just managing widgets, right? It doesn't matter if it's cabling or if it's, car seats for a car. The process is the same. That's where I think the PMP outshines the RTPM, is because if you have that certification and you decide to leave telecommunications, it's going to help you. If you go to apply, for like a GC or something, they're going to recognize that PMP. But that's kind of what I tell them as well. I know when I took my RCDD test, I know that I had a hard time with it. And it took me 2 times to pass it, actually. And the reason it took me 2 times is because my work history really hindered it. Because for 20 years or so, when I read the books, I laughed, because I was like, that's not how we do it in the field.
Right.
Now, did you have that same thing with the project management class and the certification?
No, I had a great teacher, and he, I don't know if you know a lot of the Bixie instructors.
I know some. Who was it?
He goes by Captain, and I don't know, it was a Don or Dave, but he lives up there in Massachusetts on the Cape. He worked for Bechtel for a lot of time as a project manager. He was phenomenal.
Gotcha.
And I've taken other Bixie classes before that I don't think prepped you for the test. He did. I mean, I read the book, I put in the work, but you go to that 1 week class to prep you for the test, and he was phenomenal. Right. Now, I struggled on the RCDD. I failed it my first time. I studied it for a year. I took the Bixie class. I mean, it might have been, it's been written in Greek. I mean, first 5 questions, I knew like this isn't going well for me. But I tell everybody now, if you're going to take the RCD, Corey and Steve has a prep website. It's $40 a month, all the practice tests. Oh, wow. That's the way to go.
You have to send me that information, because I get asked that question a lot, and I wasn't aware of that resource.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And it's the same thing with me. It was like reading Greek the first time I read that book, which is one of the reasons why I failed it the first time around. Yeah. And then what that did is it really angered me. And when you anger me, that's when you find out I really get dedicated to something, and I've really focused in. And then I knew the information so well that there was this one test question that they asked me, and I knew which table they were referring to, but I couldn't, from the test question, I couldn't tell which piece of information they wanted out of that table. So I answered the best I could. Then on the back, because you know how when you take the Bixie test, you can put the documentation on the back for any test question. I drew out the entire table because I'd memorized it. And that's the level you need to be to pass a lot of Bixie classes. And their exams too. They're really tough with their questions. So you got to be really good at. That's where a lot of guys run into, is because a lot of guys who go through those classes, they've been out of school for 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
They haven't had to take a test in a long time and haven't even thought about taking a test. And you got to rewire your brain to taking tests again. It can be kind of hard sometimes. It really can.
Yeah.
So tell me what you really liked about the class.
I like that, it's based off the PMBOK. So they're teaching you critical path. They're teaching you the Gantt charts. I mean, he really taught us the PMP manual stuff, but then just broke it down and applied it to structured cabling. He gave us real life examples. I mean, he was doing major telecom projects for Bechtel. So he would always tell us, stories that he did and how that applied and how this thing that we're reading about that we don't think might apply to us, how he used it, and how it bettered his career and his life as a project manager.
Very cool. Yeah, one of my mentors used to work for Bechtel, and it's funny because it must be something within Bechtel because he also authored a lot of the project management stuff within one of the companies I worked for. So it must be something within Bechtel.
They're just a big corporation. They do a lot of big time jobs, and I think they have their processes down. I mean, I took a lot of that, and I still apply them to this day. And it's probably been 6 years since I got my RTPM, and I still remember that class. I have the notes, and I mean, everything he told me that I've put in place in my life has gotten better for me professionally.
Very cool. Now you probably can figure out the next question. What didn't you like about that class?
Really, you sent me those questions last night, and I was trying to think. I think the only negative is, our industry really doesn't use like critical path or the Gantt charts as much. Now, I worked for IES Communications. I mean, they're a very big, large structured cabling company. They put in to practice a lot of that, and now I'm at Tydo Athene. They're not as big as IES, but they still they're using it because we're managing a lot larger scope projects too.
Right.
But if you're just at a local Raleigh or Indianapolis structured cabling company, you're probably not going to apply everything that you learn from the class, which is kind of sad because it's a lot of useful information.
Oh, absolutely, it is. When I was an estimator for Hinkles and McCoy, every bid that I put out the door, except for maybe something that was only like 10 cables, it had a Gantt chart with it.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is not because I'd like to show off, but it sets the expectation to the customer.
Yeah.
That, hey, you're going to be pulling the cable on these dates. You're going to be terminating on those dates. And then that way, if anything impacts the schedule, you can always go refer back and say, look, we were supposed to be terminating today and we can't because of whatever reason. We need to talk about the impact here and stuff. And it's not that hard to make a Gantt chart. I used to make mine in spreadsheets. I used to line them out in spreadsheets and just made it really easy.
Yeah.
So the next question is going to be is, how has getting your certification helped your career?
Well, that was one of the milestones I had to get promoted from the field into the office. So one, it got me to my goal of not carrying a 12-foot ladder around all day, every day. And then it just gave you some, you get to put the letters behind your name. And I use LinkedIn a lot, and, then recruiters start looking at you, other people start looking at you. And I think it just helped my career tremendously. I mean, I don't know how much of a factor it was because I think the RCDD is definitely the game changer, and anyone who's going to stick in structured cabling, they're like, which Bixby certificate should I get? I would say RCDD all day. Yep. That one really did. That one changed my life.
Absolutely. So do you think that, and this is one of the questions I didn't send you, but do you think that that class that you took, the RTPM class, helped you with your RCDD?
I think he just prepped us because the RCDD, it's such a big manual. And just like you were saying with your example of, they'll ask you something about a chart and you have to determine, well, how do they want me to answer that question? What's the best? And everything's very close. I think because he helped write a lot of the Bixby questions, he can kind of lead you how to start thinking about questions.
Right.
They're not just going to ask you how it's written in the book. They're going to give you a lot of application questions. And he did help me, start thinking that way. And maybe that's why I passed the RTPM first try too. I mean, you really have to think about what they're asking you and apply it, not just, hey, this is how it's written in the book.
And that's always been one of my biggest gripes about the RCDD test. It's about memorization. It's not about application.
Yeah.
It's always been one of my biggest things. So I'm not going to ask you how much you paid for the class because I don't know how long you've had it and price might have changed. So I'll have to look that up and I'll put it in the show somewhere, whatever.
Yeah.
But, so let me ask you this. Would you recommend that class to somebody, even if they had to pay for that class out of their own pocket?
Absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yep. And
class,
I think most companies would at least reimburse you, even if you have to front the cost yourselves. And I think that's the first time I took it. That was the wording of, if I passed the test, my company would then reimburse me for the class and the travel and all that. So I took that risk, and it's benefited me.
Yeah, last year, every year, not just every year, when the company I work for now, they you have to set a goal for that year and you have to try to achieve that goal. So when they asked me last year what I wanted to achieve the last year, and I told them I wanted to get the RTPM, and they said, well, that doesn't really fit within our business strategy. We'd really rather you go the data center route. I'm like, and I go, I think because right now I function as a trainer, and I'm in front of 1,500, 2,000 people a year. And honestly, the RTPM certification will give me more credit than the DCDC will to that crowd.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, that's why I was asking that question. Cause I was like, I wonder if I pay for it for myself, if it's really worth that money. That's actually a Chuck question. I've never gotten that question before.
Are you still with Leventon?
Yes.
Training? Okay.
Yep. Are you one of our contractors? I didn't look that up.
I don't know if Tito is, because I'm fairly new there, but that's how I met you years ago. You taught in Raleigh a couple of times. I think I took your class twice. So
very cool.
Yeah,
very
you're
cool.
A good teacher.
Former student. I like that.
Yeah.
I normally don't broadcast on the show that I work for Leventon because this is not a Leventon thing.
Right.
This is just my side hustle. And
yeah.
I was just telling somebody the other day, I'm in what I call the fall season of my career, because there's 4 seasons and fall's the last one, and I'm just trying to give back to the industry, because I've gotten so much out of this industry, and it's helped a lot. And I want to prepare the next generation or the next upcoming technicians so they have a successful career like I did, because I didn't. You didn't have mentors, and you were lucky if you got sent to training when I was a student. So,
yeah.
So how does this certification help you run your projects?
Oh man, you document. It just teaches you the documentation is key. I mean, you have to document everything, and if it's there's a saying that if it didn't happen in writing, that conversation didn't take place. So if you're in a meeting and they say something, I always follow up with an email saying, hey, this is how I understood what we talked about in today's meeting. Please confirm. You have a phone call with somebody. As soon as you hang up the phone, you call them and say, or you send an email saying, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Based on our phone call, these are the takeaways that how I understand them. Please confirm. That way it's in writing. So it's not 3 weeks later, hey, you remember that phone call that we had where we talked about this? No.
Absolutely.
It's okay. Well, here's the email where I followed up on that phone conversation.
You can't deny that when you have
a reply back and said yes.
Yeah.
So
I tell all my students there's 3 most important things you can always have are documentation, and documentation. And when that fails, more documentation.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So, you got to know documentation, and then, your scope of work. I mean, that's your Bible.
Yep.
And inevitably the customer or the GC is going to try to get you to do something that's not in your scope of work and not have you submit a change order.
Yep.
And you have to have the confidence and, the knowledge that, hey, that's not our contract. And you've got to stick up for yourself and your company, or, it's going to money, and the project manager, the financial part of it is probably the biggest role for a project manager. And a lot of us, you have bonuses depending on how profitable the job is. So if you're not up to date on that, you're getting pushed around and doing extra work for free. Your performance is going to suffer, and your company is going to probably look for a new project manager.
And there was many years when when I was a project manager, I was sitting in the weekly status meetings with GCs and stuff, and the guy who would be running that meeting would be a PMP, and here I was just just barely a brand spanking new project manager, and you're right, I would get pushed around big time because I came from that mindset of as a project foreman, whatever the customer wants, yes, we'll get it done. Never really, it wasn't until about a year or so after being a project manager that I realized you can't always say yes.
Yeah.
Can't always say yes, And then, okay, the final question is, has this certification helped you to make more money? Because that's what people want to know. Can I make more money if I get this certification?
Yeah, definitely. Now, again, the RCDD really was, you'll definitely see more money with that. But yeah, I did get a raise. But more importantly, I got out of the field and into the office, and that was a blessing in itself. So I highly recommend it. But again, as we started this off, I mean, if this is an RTPM versus PMP, it's just whichever route you want to go in. If you're going to stay in our industry all day, every day, RTPM, because it's based off the same information. But if you want to go into larger construction or general construction, the PMP, definitely.
And that's why I say, if you decide to make communications your career and you're going to stay in it, the RTPM is the one for you. It really is, because you're like you said, it's fine tuned. Yeah, right? It's like it's like a race car, right? Excuse me. You can buy a brand new Dodge Hellcat from the factory, and that's got 800 horsepower, and you can run 13s. But if you fine tune it just a little bit, you can get more performance out of it. Yeah, that's how I view the RTPM. The PMBOK is that basic foundation, and you're fine tuning it for our industry.
Yeah.
So, well, I appreciate you being on the show today and taking our time, and it was great seeing you again. I forgot that you were a student.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast for Structured Cabling. I know you and Low Voltage Nation are about the only two I really know about, but it is refreshing, and it's always good to hear how other people are doing it and how I can improve. I mean, I'm definitely not the best out there, and I want to be. I'm striving to be, and that's why listening to yours and Low Voltage Nation, and I've gotten so many things from it. And
I appreciate that. And perfection is a journey; it's not a destination.
Yeah.
Now, before I give you my thoughts on the RTPM, I want to say this: Bixie has some of the best instructors that I've ever come across. And I've been a professional instructor for almost 20 years now. And I'm telling you, they have absolutely the best. So Don, thank you for such a good job for representing Bixie so well. And it takes a lot to impress me as an instructor. Now, when I sit in a class that somebody else is teaching, I'm a student of the subject matter that they're teaching and also that person's teaching style. Right. So because Bixie is so good at picking their instructors, like I said, you'll always be good with selecting a Bixie class. Now, with that being said, the RTPM certification is perfect for our industry. It is fine-tuned for the industry. Like I said before, you go out and buy a brand new Dodge Hellcat. That's a muscle car with 800 horsepower that can do the quarter mile in 13 seconds. But if you fine-tune it, you can get a little bit more out of it. That's the RTPM. It's based on the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. But there are some things in our industry that the PMP doesn't really necessarily directly apply to us. So the RTPM fine-tuned it off the PMBOK and made it actually fit. Now, if you're like Drew and you're looking to get out of the field, this is a great door opener for that goal. Now, the cost can be kind of prohibitive for some people because the cost of the class and then the test and the application fees, they can all add up. But you're going to find that you're going to spend somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, depending on which avenue that you take. Because there are some people that will get their certifications without actually going through the class. They absolutely set you up for success, though, if you do take the class, which is one of the things you'll hear in Drew's message. I was so inspired by what Drew said in his interview that I put on one of my goals for this year to purchase the Telecommunications Project Management Methods Manual. That way I have access to that information as well. Now, the thing is, I already know a lot of stuff that's in that project management manual, but there's always something new to be learned. Remember, in this industry, you have to be a life learner. Nobody knows everything about our industry. Now, if you are a Bixby member, the cost of the book is only about $255. Non-Bixby members, it's a little over $300, but still pretty good. So stay tuned next week when we actually interview the PMP, and I'll give you my thoughts on that certification once I complete that interview as well. So until next time, be safe.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.